Okay, so you know how sometimes it feels like you're drowning in information, and you just want someone to cut through all the noise and give you the stuff that really matters? Well, that's what we do here on the Deep Dive. And today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that can be a real headache in German prepositions. You've asked us to look at some German language learning materials on this.
Right.
And I think we can all agree that mastering prepositions is absolutely essential for speaking fluent German.
Absolutely. It's kind of like they're these tiny little words,
Right.
but they have a huge impact. I mean, they can really make or break your sentence. And what these materials do so well is they break down the complexities of German prepositions in a way that's actually understandable. Like, they don't just throw a bunch of rules at you.
Right.
They actually explain the logic behind it all.
Yeah, and one of the things that they emphasize is the importance of understanding how prepositions work with those grammatical cases.
Yeah.
You know, the accusative, the dative, the genitive, and then those tricky vexel preposition that can take either accusative or dative.
Right, exactly.
And then they go beyond just those case-governing prepositions. They also look at how prepositions pair up with verbs and adjectives, the whole world of local and temporal prepositions, that's location and time for those who don't speak linguist, and even prepositions for giving directions.
Wow.
So we're going to extract all those core insights, really unpack the logic of German prepositions and, highlight the things that often trip learners up.
Absolutely.
So let's just jump right in and
here we
start with those fundamental building blocks, the link between prepositions and those grammatical cases.
All right, so maybe a good place to start is with the prepositions that always demand a specific case, no matter what.
Right.
So for the accusative case, we have, 6 prepositions. Bis, durch, für, gegen, ohne.
6, to lock into the accusative category.
Okay.
Got it. And the text gives us some really helpful examples, which always makes things clearer. So with bis, for instance, we have the sentence, Der Bus fährt nicht bis Frankfurt. The bus doesn't go all the way to Frankfurt. And then with durch, wir gehen durch den Park. So we're walking through the park. Für. Die Familie Müller fährt für eine Woche in Urlaub. The Miller family is going on vacation for 1 week. Okay, gegen, der Ball fliegt gegen das Fenster. Oof, the ball flies against the window. Ohne meinen Kaffee kann ich nicht arbeiten. I can't work without my coffee. I hear that.
Yeah.
And finally, ich gehe die Ecke. I'm going around the corner. And those are all pretty straightforward.
Right.
Now, what about the dative prepositions?
All right, so for the dative, we've got aus, bei, mit, nach, seit, von, zu, always dative.
Okay.
Every time.
Perfect. And for those, we have aus. Der Lehrer kommt aus dem Klassenzimmer. The teacher's coming out of the classroom. Okay, bei. Treffen wir uns bei mir. Shall we meet at my place? Mit Katja. Sie spricht mit ihrer Freundin. She's speaking with her friend. Nach. Was machst du noch? Was machst du nach dem Essen? What are you doing after the meal? Always a good question.
Yeah.
Zeit ist, lerne Deutsch seit 2 Monaten. I've been learning German for 2 months. Vergangen, das habe ich von meinem Bruder gehört. I heard that from my brother. And lastly, to Bahnhof. Are you driving to the train station?
Okay, so we've got our always accusative and always dative prepositions all sorted out.
Yep.
Now, what about those ones that cause all kinds of confusion?
Oh, the Wechsel preposition.
Right, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky.
Right.
So how do you know when to use accusative and when to use dative?
Right.
I think a good way to think about it is like this. Are we talking about a static location, like where something is?
Right.
Or are we talking about the direction, the movement to a place? So that's really the key.
Right, so these Wechselpräpositionen, which are an auf, hinter, in, neben, über, unter, vor, zwischen, they're like these kind of grammatical chameleons.
I love that.
Yeah, right. So location, wo, means dative, and direction, wohin, that signals accusative. And the examples in this text are so clear, like they really illustrate this beautifully. So with an Anni, for instance, das Bild hängt an der Wand. The picture is hanging on the wall. So that's location, dative.
Location, dative.
Okay. But then, ich hänge das Bild an die Wand. I'm hanging the picture on the wall.
So there's movement.
Yeah, and there's movement.
It's an action.
Right, so that's direction.
Accusative.
Accusative. And you'll notice that the verb changes too, right? From hängt, which means is hanging, to hänge, which means I'm hanging. So that's the action.
Exactly. And that change in the verb, that's often a really good clue, whether you need to use dative or accusative.
That's a great point. And we see the same pattern with auf. Die Tasse steht auf dem Tisch. The cup is standing on the table. So again, that's location, dative.
Dative.
But then, Ich stelle die Tasse auf den Tisch. I am putting the cup on the table. Movement, direction, accusative. So really the key is to always ask yourself, is there movement towards a place? If the answer is yes, then accusative. But if it's just a state of being in a place, then it's dative. That's so helpful. And it continues, this pattern, in l'honneur. Arbeitet in der Stadt. He works in the city. Location, dative. But then, fährt in die Stadt, he's driving into the city. Direction, accusative. And hinterrate. Das Fahrrad steht hinter dem Haus. The bicycle is standing behind the house. Dative. But stellt das Fahrrad hinter das Haus, he's putting the bicycle behind the house. Accusative. Neben. Die Katze liegt neben dem Sofa. The cat's lying next to the sofa. Dative. But sie setzt sich neben das Sofa. She's sitting down next to the sofa. Accusative. Okay. Are you with me, so?
Totally with you.
Yeah. Okay. We're on a roll. Über. Die Wolken ziehen über dem Land. The clouds are moving over the land. Dative. Versus der Vogel fliegt über das Haus. The bird's flying over the house. Accusative. And unter. Das Fahrrad, das Buch liegt unter dem Stuhl. The book's lying under the chair.
State of being.
State of being, right. Dative, but wirft den Ball unter den Stuhl. He throws the ball under the chair. That's movement.
Action.
Yeah. Action, accusative. And for, die Kinder spielen vor dem Haus. The children are playing in front of the house. Dative. But sie laufen aus das Haus. They're running in front of the house. Accusative. And last but not least, it's zwischen Berlin, liegt zwischen Hamburg und Dresden. Berlin lies between Hamburg and Dresden. So that's dative.
Location.
But then, wir fahren zwischen Berlin und Dresden hin und her. We're driving back and forth between Berlin and Dresden. So we're talking about the movement, right?
Exactly.
So that would be accusative.
It's implied movement.
Right.
That's a good point.
I love those paired examples. They're so crystal clear. It really boils down to, is it a state of being?
Right.
Or is it an action?
That's it.
Location versus direction. And now these materials point out something really helpful. Those short forms that you often see when you're using these Wechsel preposition with the definite article.
Oh, contractions, yeah.
Yeah.
These are great because they just make everything sound more natural and more fluent. So for the accusative case, and das becomes ons and in das becomes ins. And for the dative, and dem shortens to am, and in dem becomes im.
I see.
And you'll also see things like auf das becomes aufs, bei dem becomes beim, durch das becomes durchs, von dem becomes vom, zu dem becomes zum, and zu der becomes tur. You don't have to use these.
Right.
But it's good to know them.
Right, because you'll hear them and it just makes your German sound smoother.
Exactly.
And then there's this really, really helpful don't confuse section that focuses on those pairs of verbs that look so similar but actually have different meanings.
Oh, yeah?
Depending on whether they describe a state, which usually goes with dative, or an action, which usually goes with accusative.
This is a classic trap for learners, isn't it?
Oh, it's a huge trap.
Yeah.
So the pairs are sitzen setzen, stehen stellen, liegen legen, and hängen. And what's tricky is that the second verb in each pair usually implies more of an active putting or placing.
It does.
Yeah. Subtle.
So subtle. So we have ich sitze auf dem Sofa. I am sitting on the sofa. That's just a state of being, so it's dative.
Dative.
Versus ich setze mich auf das Sofa. I am sitting myself on the sofa.
There you go.
That's the action.
Right.
Action. Accusative. Similarly, das Glas steht auf dem Tisch. The glass is standing on the table. That's dative.
Dative.
But stellt das Glas auf den Tisch. He places the glass on the table. So he's doing something. It's accusative.
Right.
Then we have das Buch liegt im Riegel. The book is lying on the shelf.
Yeah.
Again, state of being.
State of being.
But
yeah.
Sie legt das Buch ins Riegel. She's laying the book on the shelf.
Action.
Yeah, action. Accusative. And finally, those infamous hängen. Die Lampe hängt über dem Tisch. The lamp's hanging above the table. That's the state. It's dative. But hängt die Lampe über den Tisch. He hangs the lamp above the table.
That's the action.
He's actively doing it.
He is.
Accusative. It's so subtle. But getting it right really makes your German sound much more natural.
Now let's move on to the prepositions that always take the genitive case.
Ah, yes, the genitive case.
Yeah.
The material highlights außerhalb, innerhalb, trotz, während, wegen.
The genitive culprits.
The genitive culprits, yes. And these prepositions, they can express all sorts of different relationships.
Right.
Like, for instance, außerhalb and innerhalb can refer to a local context, a place.
Right. Like, außerhalb des Hauses ist es kalt. It's cold outside the house.
Exactly.
And innerhalb der Öffnungszeiten können Sie uns erreichen. You can reach us within the opening hours.
That's right.
And then they can also be temporal, indicating a point in time or a span of time.
Exactly.
So, for example, während des Urlaubs habe ich viel gelesen. During the vacation, I read a lot. And innerhalb eines Jahres hat er große Fortschritte gemacht. Within a year, he made great progress.
Right.
And then wegen is interesting because it tells us the cause or the reason.
Exactly.
Wegen des schlechten Wetters bleiben wir zu Hause. Because of the bad weather, we are staying home. And then trotz is kind of the opposite.
It is. It expresses that something is happening despite something else.
Opposition.
Yes, opposition.
Yeah.
Trotz der Müdigkeit ging er zur Arbeit. Despite the tiredness, he went to work.
It's amazing, though, isn't it? Like, these little words can actually encapsulate whole ideas.
They really can. And actually, the material points out that trotz and wiving can even replace entire subordinate clauses that start with weil, meaning because, and obwohl, meaning although.
Wow.
So they give us the example. Wegen des Staus kam er zu spät, which is the same as saying, weil es einen Stau gab, kam er zu spät. He came late because of the traffic jam.
Right.
And trotz des Regens machen wir einen Spaziergang is basically the same as saying, obwohl es regnet, machen wir einen Spaziergang. Despite the rain, we are going for a walk.
It's a nice shortcut.
It's a nice little shortcut, yeah. And, speaking of shortcuts, these materials highlight something really interesting. In everyday spoken German, you'll often hear trotz, wegen, and wegen being used with the dative case.
Oh, yeah.
Even though, grammatically speaking, they should take the genitive. You're right, that's spoken German for you.
So don't be surprised if you hear people say, like, trotz dem Regen instead of trotz des Regen.
It's much more common.
Right. Spoken language has its own little quirks.
Exactly.
All right, so we've covered the case governing prepositions themselves. Now, these materials move on to how these little words team up with verbs. And this is where things can get super specific, right?
They really can.
Yeah.
So many German verbs, they kind of come with their own special preposition.
They do.
And as we said earlier, that preposition then determines the case of the noun or the pronoun that follows. It's all connected.
It's all connected. And the material gives us this great list of important verbs that always take the accusative case. So let's run through a few of those. We have antworten auf, to answer to or on. Antwortet immer auf meine E-Mails. He always answers my emails. Sich ärgern über, to be annoyed about. Sie ärgert sich oft über das Wetter. She often gets annoyed about the weather.
I hear that.
Yeah, who doesn't? Sich bedanken für, to thank for. Wir möchten uns für Ihre Hilfe bedanken. We would like to thank you for your help. Denken an, to think about. Ich denke oft an meine Kindheit. I often think about my childhood.
Yeah, lovely.
And warten auf, to wait for. Wir warten schon eine Stunde auf den Zug. We've already been waiting for the train for an hour. So you really do have to learn these verbs and prepositions together, right?
You do. You can't separate them. They're a package deal.
They're a package deal. And the text points out something really important. Some verbs can actually be used with multiple prepositions. And depending on which preposition you use, the meaning of the verb actually changes.
Oh, that's tricky.
It's really tricky. And sich freuen is a perfect example. You can sich freuen auf something like, die Kinder freuen sich auf Weihnachten. The children are looking forward to Christmas. And here, auf Bounding really signals that anticipation of a future event.
Looking ahead.
Yeah, looking ahead.
To something good.
Yeah. But then you can also sich freuen über, like, ich freue mich über dein Geschenk. I'm happy about your present. Or wir haben uns über den Besuch gefreut. We were happy about the visit. And in this case, über relates to something that's happening now or perhaps that has already happened.
Right, so present or past.
So it's a really important distinction.
It is.
Because you don't want to mix those up. You want to express the right emotion at the right time.
Exactly. And it just shows how important the preposition is, right?
Totally.
It's integral to the meaning.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the material also provides a nice list of important verbs that take the dative.
Perfect. So give us some of those.
Okay, so we've got Anfang mit to begin with. Wir fangen jetzt mit der Arbeit an. You're starting with the work now, no time to waste.
Yeah.
Aufhören mit, to stop with. Hör bitte mit dem Lärm auf. Please, stop with the noise. I think we've all said that one. Sich bedanken bei, to thank someone. Bedankt sich bei seinem Chef. He thanks his boss. Fragen nach, to ask about. Der Tourist fragt nach dem Weg. The tourist is asking for directions. Helfen bei, to help with. Kannst du mir beim Kochen helfen? Can you help me with the cooking? Always a good one.
Always need help with that.
Exactly. Then we've got sprechen mit, to speak with, and sprechen von, to speak of.
Oh, interesting.
So, ich habe lange mit meiner Mutter gesprochen. I spoke with my mother for a long time.
Right.
Versus, sie spricht oft von ihren Reisen. She often speaks of her travels. So you see two different prepositions, two slightly different meanings.
Yeah, subtle difference.
And then lastly, träumen von, to dream of.
Yeah.
träumt von einem neuen Auto. He dreams of a new car.
Who doesn't? Okay, so these verb preposition combinations, they're really like these essential building blocks.
Absolutely. Like
Yeah.
you learn these and it really unlocks so much of the language. And, it's not just verbs that have these prepositional partners.
Oh, right. Adjectives do too.
Adjectives do too.
Certain adjectives in German always go with a specific preposition.
They do.
And then that preposition governs the case of the following word.
It's chain reaction.
It's a chain reaction, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so the materials give us some key adjectives that take the accusative.
Right. So let's see. We've got bekannt für, known for. Deutschland is bekannt für sein Bier. Germany is known for its beer.
Stereotypes.
Stereotypes, perhaps.
Or
Dankbar für, thankful for. Sie ist dankbar für die Hilfe ihrer Freunde. She is thankful for the help of her friends. Gespannt auf, curious about, looking forward to. Wir sind gespannt auf das Ergebnis. We are curious about the result.
or excited.
Or excited, yes. Wichtig für, important for.
Yeah.
Gute Noten sind wichtig für die Zukunft. Good grades are important for the future.
Absolutely.
And wütend auf, angry at. Ist wütend auf seinen Kollegen. He is angry at his colleague.
Again, very relatable. Now, there's also a list of important adjectives that require the dative case.
There is, yeah. So let's see. We've got abhängig von, dependent on. Der Erfolg ist abhängig vom Wetter. The success is dependent on the weather.
Fingers across.
Begeistert von, enthusiastic about. Sie ist begeistert von dem neuen Buch. She is enthusiastic about the new book. Einverstanden mit, in agreement with. Bist du mit meinem Vorschlag einverstanden? Are you in agreement with my suggestion? Good question. Good question to ask. Then there's interessiert and interested in. Ist sehr interessiert an Geschichte. He is very interested in history. And finally, zufrieden mit, satisfied with.
Sie ist zufrieden mit ihrer Arbeit. She is satisfied with her work. Lucky her.
That is lucky. And again, just like with the verb preposition combinations, you really need to learn these adjective preposition pairings as set phrases. Absolutely. Learn them as chunks. Okay, so we've tackled the case-governing prepositions themselves. We've looked at how they pair up with verbs and adjectives. Now, the materials really get into the specifics of local prepositions. So this is all about answering those crucial questions. Woher, from where? Wo, where? And wohin, to where?
Yeah, this is where you really start to get a sense of place in German.
Absolutely. This section dives into the specifics of expressing location and direction. So let's start with woher, indicating origin. The main prepositions here are aus and von, and they always take the dative case. But how do you know which one to use? Well, a good rule of thumb is that we generally use aus when we're talking about coming from inside something, like a city or a country or a building, or even from a direction like aus dem Süden, from the south.
Ah, I saw.
On the other hand, tends to be used when we're talking about coming from something that's more open, like from a body of water or an island, or even from a person or an activity.
Right, like vom Sport.
Exactly, from doing sport. Or the classic example, von zu Hause, from home.
Okay, that's a good one to remember. So, aus dem Kino, from the cinema, but vom Arzt, from the doctor.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Now what about wo? Location. So that's where something is.
Right. And here, the prepositions are in and auf and bei, all taking the dative case.
Okay.
And again, it really depends on the specifics of where something is situated.
Right.
So in is kind of your go-to preposition when you're talking about being inside something.
Mm-hmm.
Cities, regions, most countries, if you use an article, enclosed spaces like rooms or buildings, in nature.
Yeah.
So lots of ins. In Büro, in the office, in Wald, in the forest, in Deutschland, in Germany.
Right.
And that suggests being in contact with something or at a specific point.
Right, so like en der Tür, at the door, am Fluss, by the river, am Fenster, by the window.
Exactly. Auf is for being on something.
Right.
So you could be on an island, like auf Rügen,
Okay.
or on an elevated spot, like auf dem Berg,
Right.
on the mountain, or in an open area, like auf dem Marktplatz, on the market square.
Right.
And you could even be at an event, often at a party.
I like that one.
And finally, beid indicates proximity, being near something or someone.
Ah, I see. So like by meinen Eltern at my parents' house.
Exactly. Or beim Friseur at the hairdresser's, or beim Essen while eating.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's a pretty nuanced system, but breaking it down like this really helps to clarify it.
It does, yeah. Makes it more manageable.
It does. Now, lastly, for wohin, destination, we have nach, in, and auf, all of which take the accusative, and zu, which takes the dative.
That's right. And we're talking about direction of movement here.
We are.
So nach is used for going to cities, islands without an article. So like nach Sylt.
Okay.
Countries without an article, like nach die Italien.
Right.
And general directions, nach Osten, to the east.
Got it.
In is for going into countries with an article.
In die Türkei, into Turkey.
Exactly. Or into enclosed spaces, like die Küche, into the kitchen.
Right.
And indicates moving to a point of contact.
Yeah.
Or to a body of water.
So like an understaterin, to the beach.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Auf is for moving onto surfaces, islands with an article. So, like auf die Seychellen, to the Seychelles.
Lovely.
And open areas, like auf den Spielplatz, to the playground.
All right.
And then zu is a more general to, often indicating going to a person.
Like zu meiner Freundin, to my friends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or to see a professional or use a service, like zum Arzt, to the doctors, or even to an activity. Zum Yoga, to yoga.
Yoga. Okay.
And as the materials point out, sometimes you have a choice of preposition.
Right.
And the different prepositions can actually express slightly different nuances of meaning.
Right. They give that really nice example with nach Haus versus ins is Haus. So nach Haus is more like going home in general.
In general, yes.
Whereas ins Haus is more like specifically going into the house.
Exactly.
So it's subtle, but it can change the meaning.
It can. The material also gives a good example with directions.
Oh, right.
So nach Süden simply means in a southerly direction,
Okay.
whereas in den Süden implies going to the south, like to the southern region of a country.
I see. So subtle, but important difference.
Absolutely. And then they give us another example with buildings.
Okay.
So we have Fang zu Haus or Ostemhaus for origin, where you're coming from.
Right.
Zuhaus or Imhaus for location, where you are.
Okay.
And then nach Haus, ins Haus, zum Kino, this Kino for destination, where you're going.
Okay, that's really helpful to see it all laid out like that.
It is. It shows how much nuance these little words can express. And building on that, the materials also introduce some additional prepositions that are particularly useful for giving directions and describing routes.
Okay, so like the real navigation tools.
Exactly. So we have en-lang, which takes the accusative case
Yeah.
and usually comes after the noun.
Okay. That's unusual, right?
It is a little bit unusual.
Most prepositions come before the noun.
They do. But en-lang likes to be different.
It does.
So you would say, gehen Sie die Straße entlang, walk along the street.
Okay.
Then we have elum, also accusative, meaning around. Gehen Sie einmal den Block herum, walk around the block once. And vorbei, which takes the dative and means cast. Fahren Sie an der Ampel vorbei, drive past the traffic light.
Right.
Gegenüber von, opposite of, also dative. Das Restaurant gegenüber von der Bank. The restaurant's opposite the bank.
Okay.
And then finally, innerhalb, within, and außerhalb, outside of, both taking the genitive.
Right.
So innerhalb des Zentrums ist es oft voll. It's often crowded within the center. And außerhalb der Stadt ist es ruhiger. It's quieter outside the city.
Okay, so with all of those in your toolkit, you should be able to find your way around in German. No problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No more getting lost.
Yeah.
Okay, so our final category in this deep dive is temporal prepositions, which are all about answering those questions.
Wann
When,
and wie lang? How long?
right? Time. Because time is always important, especially in German.
It is, and the materials do a great job of breaking down these temporal prepositions.
Yeah.
First, they focus on those that indicate a specific point in time.
Okay, so like the whens.
Exactly. So, takes the accusative case and is used for precise times. 10, at 10 o'clock.
M takes the dative and is used for days, parts of the day, except for in der Nacht, and dates.
So like am Montag, on Monday.
Exactly. Or am Abend
Mhm.
in the evening.
Okay.
Am 15, August, on August 15th.
Right.
And also dative is used for festivals and holidays. And Ostern, at Easter.
Okay.
Im, or in, dative, are for seasons, months, and longer periods. Im summer, in the summer.
Okay.
Im Juni, in June.
Right.
In 20, Jahrhundert, in the 20th century.
Right.
Then we have gegen, which takes the accusative and is used for approximate times. Gegen Mitternacht, around midnight.
Around midnight. Okay.
And it's worth noting that we usually don't use any preposition when we're talking about the year itself.
Right. So like 2023.
Exactly. Or with certain adverbial time indications, like gestern, yesterday, and nächste Woche, next week.
Okay, got it. So those are the point in time prepositions. Now, what about the prepositions that help us talk about the beginning, the end, or the duration of something?
Okay, so let's look at those. Bis, which takes the accusative, is for the end point of something. Ich warte bis morgen, I'll wait until tomorrow.
Right.
Für, also accusative, indicates the duration. Wir bleiben für 2 Wochen. We're staying for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Über, accusative, means longer than. Das Konzert dauert über 3 Stunden. The concert lasts for more than 3 hours.
Okay.
Ab or von an, both dative, signal the beginning of something.
Ah, okay. So like, ab nächste Woche habe ich Urlaub. I'm on vacation starting next week.
Exactly. Or von Montag, an arbeite ich im neuen Büro I'm working in.